This is episode one of a three-part series with my good friend Greg D. Greg D is an instrument of change and transformation. His story is impactful and takes you from the darkest depths of mental illness into a life of service through what he has created in his opportunity to impact lives of youth and countless people around the country. I hope you enjoy this three-part series with Greg D. All right, so I'm here with the amazing Greg, who is such an awesome friend of mine, and I wanted to share just this conversation with all of you. Basically free-flowing conversation with some topics that I feel we can all relate to. Of course, you as the audience, and also just expand on my relationship with Greg. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself here, and then I'll hand it over to Greg, and we'll see where we go with the direction of this experiment in having conversations with people that have influenced my life, and I hope that will influence yours. So, Dogate Andrew Ecker Yinishe, Donna E Nishinigi E, Inde Nishe Irish Bashachin, Inde Dashiche German Dashanali, Kote Go E Chishli E Portland, Oregon Nasha, Shema E Kathy Lindsay Woye, Shaza E Del Ecker Wole. So my name's Andrew Ecker, my mother Kathy Lindsay, my father Dale Ecker, my mother's mother Elva Gallegos, a Apache woman from New Mexico, my father's mother Evelyn Beatty, Irish woman from Pennsylvania, my mother's father Leroy Lindsay, Apache man from Arkansas, my father's father Wayne Ecker, German Algonquin from Pennsylvania. I have a daughter Bailey, a son Peyton, beautiful beloved fiance Monica. I was incarnated into this body in Portland, Oregon, the land of the Multnomah, although I reside here in Phoenix, Arizona, the land of the Akno Atom, and I'm grateful to be here with my boy here, Greg. And Greg is an awesome influence in my life. He has been a part of our community, our drum circle community, for years now, and I'm really kind of like challenged to even remember when we first started collaborating.
Well over 10 years.
I'm feeling that. I'm feeling that. I know it goes back to 13th Tribe and those days when I was still, utilizing this language that I'm not like totally comfortable with anymore. The idea of claiming community as a tribe feels like something that I don't totally resonate with it. As much as I did back in the day when I was still coming into these teachings, still coming into these evolutionary processes.
Why don't you resonate with the tribe?
Well, because it brings offense to people, like there's certain groups of people out there that are like, oh, that word is designated to a certain group of people. I feel like, my community is my tribe, but in a public forum, right, there's a challenge for me to like bring that out. And that's why I dissolved the identity of 13th Tribe. That was like our branding. That was what we were. And primarily that group was a group of people that I met at church. I was a pastor for 3.5 years and had kind of made these connections in the Christian community.
You were a pastor for 3.5 years? As long as I've known you, I don't think I knew that.
Well, that part of my life was something that I really, it was a challenge for me, man, because when we first met, I was coming out of that world, I was coming out of that Christian world and really like trying to find a comfort in dissolving that identity within myself, because being a pastor and being that role, it's a huge responsibility. I mean, I worked with inner city kids primarily, and worked in Sunny Slope, and I'm sure you're familiar with that neighborhood. It was the slope, right, where there's no hope and there's a whole lot of dope. No, I'm not saying that anymore, man. It's starting to get really nice over there. It still has some issues, of course, but back in the day, it was really rough. I mean, a lot of crack, a lot of just dope. And it was a place that when I was out there using, I was on the street there, like that was where I was doing a lot of my whole, like, what we do when we're out there using, all of that. So when I came back, when I first got out of prison, that was one of my mission fields. That was where I wanted to be, and took a bus ministry from about 4 kids to 2 buses running about 120 kids, to church in that 3.5 years of going and knocking on doors and showing up with food boxes and, doing all the things, and had a couple records at the church. I was working at Phoenix First Assembly, and we had the record for
Oh,
the
really? That's where you were.
yeah, the most kids on a
Pastor Tommy,
yep, Tommy Barnett. Boy,
Matthew. We
man.
didn't. We never talked to that connection because I was around at the whole genesis and birth of the LA International Dream Center, their LA campus. I don't know if you ever
What?
knew about that.
You're kidding me. That's now Matthew Barnett, I think, is over there.
Yeah, Matthew was just a freaking kid. He was like 18. This was in like 90, 94, 95 when I was living out in LA. They had just bought the place. I mean, it was a old abandoned church where like huge percent of the people in LA had been born previously, and it was pretty abandoned, for the most part, really down and dilapidated. They had a guy, Pastor Phil, Set Free Ministries, who started Set Free Ministries. Not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's a biker gangbanger who found Christ in prison, came out and started the Set Free Ministries in Anaheim, which grew really huge. And then that kind of dissolved and he had ended up there. So he was living there with his family and kind of a group of sort of discipleship program, all like gangbangers and bikers for Jesus. I'll tell you the story sometime of how I connected with them, but it's freaking crazy story. But I did a music video. His kids rapped. So he was like, well, I'll just tell you the story real quick. It's a pretty awesome story. So, I was living in LA and I was, pursuing film and entertainment stuff. I was working on some various stuff like MTV and some movies and things like that and kind of lower level positions, and had started working on my own TV show idea that was like, I was doing like a pilot of kind of guerrilla style. And it was called Generation Y was the show. And it's like, I've always been a big fan of 60 Minutes. And so it's kind of a 60 Minutes type of concept, but geared towards like youth and topics that younger generations would be into. And so I called it Generation Y. And this was before that term was used. Generation X was out there, but it was called Generation Y. And so as one of the segments I came up with was called Media Circus Update. And so the concept was to go down to whatever the media circus of the day was and to do like behind the scenes type of thing and like, fuck with the reporters and just kind of the freaks that were down there that I, thought would be down there trying to get on TV and stuff. And so I hired a guy with a Betacam, which was the kind of news camera of the day, and went down there. And it was the day of final closing arguments in the O.J. Simpson trial. And
what?
Remember those days, but it was fucking massive. That was like a huge story. So there's just thousands and thousands of people down there. And I I got this Uncle Sam mask that said, this an colored rainbow afro wig and like said Y on the forehead of the mask. And I had, I smoked a lot of pot at the time. And so the whole day was just so surreal. But anyway, so I'd like filmed some, and I actually connected with this really deep story of this guy's sister was out there with his cousin. And they had all these pictures of this black guy, big poster type pictures, kind of laying up against the wall, and started talking to them. And they're telling about her brother who's been wrongfully imprisoned for like 25 years, and at the time I think and named Geronimo Pratt. And so he's this little guy from Louisiana who was went to Vietnam, decorated war vet, and he moved to Los Angeles, or after on the GI Bill to go to school. Well, he got involved early on with the Black Panthers and quickly rose up, and he was head of the Black Panther Party in Los Angeles, and and he was basically, long story short, framed for this murder because Hoover had this thing of, CONTELPRO, which was destroy the Black Panthers by any means necessary. He was clearly framed by the murder. At this point, he'd been in there, like I say, 25 years. 60 Minutes had done a story on him. Johnny Cochran was actually his public defender at the time when he went through it. And like, it was just crazy story. They had him on wiretaps, because they had him on he was in San Francisco at the time these murders happened. And they had wiretaps of him being in San Francisco talking on the phone from the Black Panthers headquarters there. The murders happened in Santa Monica. Those miraculously disappeared. But at any rate, I found out about that, story and interviewed them and stuff. And then I went back to the car to change the battery on the camera. and get high. And so we, blazing up in the car, get out of the car, and I look over, and like 2 cars over, Snoop Dogg is hanging out there, is standing there. And I'm like, yo, what's up? And he had some court case, and his lawyer was like, 100 yards away giving a press conference. I was like, yo, Snoop, can I, interview you right quick or whatever? So I did a little impromptu interview with Snoop Dogg. Then I go around the corner and back into the front of all the chaos is in front of the courthouse. And there's this big group of like gangbangers and bikers, and they have these big Jesus sign, and these 2 kids, turned out to be MJ and Chili Dog, were rapping, and they were doing like changing the lyrics around a song. So they were singing this song, remember that song OPP?
Yeah.
So there's, you down with G.O.D., yeah, you know me, who down with G.O.D.? They had these girls were dancing, and these like big,
Oh, so like Christian hip hop.
Yeah, and these big, mean ass looking, bikers and gangbangers, like, who were smiling and laughing. And so I was like in mask, in the mask and all that, and danced with them, and was part of that for a while. And there's just, cameras everywhere. It was just massive. But I never knew who they were, and I never, and I watched the footage after it, but I had no idea how to connect with them or who they even were. And then like a couple months later, I was down at Venice Beach, and I hear this music off in the distance, and I'm like, wait, that sounds freaking kind of familiar. And I'm like, go over there, and it was them. And that's where they were doing like a street outreach type of thing. And turned out they were living at the LA International, Queen of Angels Hospital then. And I went there and connected with them, and then we had them do a secular song and did a music video. And yeah, so that's my whole connection to them. But it was really kind of Pastor Phil that really brought me towards or just that whole experience that brought me back towards Jesus, and like more so Jesus from the man perspective and from a spirit perspective, rather than the Christian perspective, which I had been exposed to, because I had, didn't really grow up, religious, maybe church on the holidays sort of thing. And then my stepdad was Jewish. I went to a Catholic high school. In New Orleans, you go down to the quarter frequently, there's like people standing on the corner with Jesus signs yelling at you, telling you're going to freaking go to hell. And so I had a very, kind of negative perception of the whole kind of Jesus thing. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people do. And it was just in like some interviews and stuff with him and some other stuff that kind of happened, but started, kind of get that grips with the understanding of Jesus, the man, and that Jesus wasn't about religion. He wasn't about, having this fancy place of stature. And the one group that he ever really went off on was the religious leaders of the time. And so it was in that whole experience, and shortly thereafter, actually, after I finished shooting the video, or as I was shooting the video, and then the days after that, I went, had my first manic episode, my kind of whole spiritual experience where I, started giving away everything, was arrested, walking naked down Martin Luther King Boulevard, put in the jail briefly, and then the mental hospital for the first time. And then that kind of, started my long personal journey into mental health,
Yeah, I definitely feel that there's this path, that the creator kind of puts us on, that God puts us on. And there's like all these different layers in that bring us to that place in which we come into some sort of relationship with this idea of something greater, than ourselves. So, myself, like, as you open up that container and you start to talk about the way that, and I'm hearing this underneath this, right? I'm hearing that there's this little thread of, potentially this idea inside of that conversation as you began to explore spirituality, that the spirituality was also a part of, the hyper focus inside of your, what, for lack of a better term, what the contemporary culture would call the psychosis, or, I feel more comfortable with the awakening process, or, potentially even your, how you came into your medicine in a certain sense. Like, I would like to label it as that. But there are also, right, coming from that behavioral health, that mental health space, there are terminologies like the psychosis. And, I would love to explore that with you if you're open to that, because it resonates with me all the way back to my childhood and getting letters from my mom, right? Because my mom was institutionalized. She was in psychiatric hospitals. She was in prison. And, that was always kind of a thread and a focus inside of the conversation of her own psychosis. And then in my life, right, as I came into my awakening process, that was a thread inside of mine as well. The demonic, the heavenly beings, the angels. For me, it was like I would wake up in the morning and I would have a thought of suicide. I would walk into a room and the television would be talking about suicide. So I associated this with a demon talking through the TV, right? And I was like, oh my God, there's something controlling all of this shit around me. And I don't know how comfortable you are in exploring that. And I want to give you like the
Yeah,
opportunity
no,
to.
I'm cool. I'm cool.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So at that beginning moment, right, when you first came into that, like let's call it a transformational experience. All right.
Right.
You went into that space of transformation. You started maybe experiencing some of these things that I was experiencing in my life, altered states of reality. You starting to see your thoughts manifest in people, manifest on the television, manifest in the radio. You're like, holy shit, what's going on here?
Right.
How can I control this shit? Because it's so, it's fucking overwhelming, first of all. It's like, okay, I'm a human being, but I'm seeing this stuff happen.
Right.
And then, right, you come in contact with these Jesus freaks, for lack of a better term, and they're
Right.
talking about people walking on water, and they're talking about, bushes talking to people and donkeys talking to people. And you're like, oh, well, there's something to this, maybe potentially in your subconscious mind, right? So, the place that you're in now. So, for those of you that don't know Greg, right, he is an advocate for mental health. He works in suicide prevention. He's got a long history of service to community. And I've been working with the man for over 10 years and doing these sorts of works. So he has a pretty, awesome perspective on this stuff. So how do you balance that relational spirituality conversation of seeing the effectiveness of things like church, seeing the effectiveness of things like a higher power, and also like realizing like how dysfunctional that shit can get, right? When you start like, you know what I'm saying? Like you start like showing up and thinking that there's fucking demons controlling the television, like what's the balance in that for you?
I mean, it's kind of an ongoing process. You know what I mean? Because there's the, my experience and belief. There's definitely that, how to describe it, but the spiritual world, the other sort of realm. There's, for me, still believe there's a lot of reality in my psychosis or my, awakenings and sort of experiences. So, particularly early on and what I experienced being so real, and then understanding it was pretty unreal, later to people. Cause mine, did start kind of similar to what you were describing. A lot of it kind of started with music, in terms of hearing, sort of, messages within music. It's kind of, like that song, I bet you think this song is about you. You know what I mean? And like being really convinced of that, and hearing sort of messages, for lack of a better word, and even the continuation of that, and so that kind of even today plays, if being honest, plays a lot into to my story, and from what kind of started there, because I definitely do believe there's kind of higher powers at work, and in a bigger picture of things, and of massive sort of transition of our sort of world, for lack of a better word, and understanding or believing my kind of divine selection for significant role in that, and then on that is reinforced with certain people that like yourself, that God has put in my life and existence, that are on similar paths, and it's kind of like that united federation of chosen ones. You know what I mean? And it's like, and it's it's deep out there, sort of, kind of shit in a lot of ways. But, and like you were saying again, though, can be it's something that needs to be managed because it's something that could take you off and lead you in freaking crazy as a motherfucker and needing to be locked in mental hospitals kind of for your own protection in a lot of, in a lot of ways.
Mostly that's you hit it right on the button, man. It's mostly your own protection. And I feel like that is a lot of cultural influence, right?
Right.
Myself being beat up by the police because I'm, on the corner preaching about some shit that really people need to hear about.
Right.
But the reality is that they're not really ready. And I'm talking about, this is me 20 years ago, right? Prior to prison, experimenting a lot with mushrooms and LSD and smoking a lot of weed and going to places in my own mind that, the structure of a city is not ready for. Like it's not ready for Andrew to show up in that, whether it
Right.
be and for Andrew's safety, right?
Right.
Like I may need to go like sit down in a place that's safe. Now, what's challenging for me is like, where does the representation of people that have been there inside of that container? You know what I'm saying? Because like for us to talk about your thoughts manifesting in a radio or your thoughts manifesting in a television, like I don't know if the average psychiatrist, right, can speak to that kind of shit. So when we're at festivals and these kids come into the fire, they come into the drum circle and we're out there and they're experimenting with all these substances. And I'm 22 years substance abuse free. So I'm going to share this with you as a person that's seeing the transformation in the culture, right? We're seeing where microdosing of mushrooms and microdosing of LSD is becoming, and even ketamine. I mean, shit that when we were kids, like this was straight up underground. You had to go to a rave to get this shit, or you had to go out to the woods and hang out with dreadlock having hippies, to get this sort of stuff. But now it's, fucking Mayo is doing like,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? Like doing
I was
studies.
talking to my buddy yesterday in San Francisco. He's, my age and very successful, and they're experimenting with microdosing, mushrooms and stuff.
It's huge right now. It's a huge conversation. It's all over LinkedIn. It's all over, like they're preparing for mushrooms. They're like, these investors are looking at mushrooms as the infrastructure of marijuana right now. It's like there's investment capital going into this stuff. So you're going to see transformation on a very quick, when we were kids and we were I got locked up, my first felony was a bag of weed. That was what caused me to get into the probation system and then feel the insecurity of not being able to make my probation fees and then start selling LSD and mushrooms to actually make my fucking probation fees. If you really want to know like what happened at Andrew Ecker, there was a motivation, right, for me to get out there and share these medicines with the world because I seen the transformation in my life, right, of going from being, the son of two drug addicts, being left at dope houses, being sexually abused, being physically abused by grandparents that didn't know how to take care of me because I'm fucking traumatized as a little kid and just going through that whole shit of the system, right? And then, getting a drug felony and then having to sell drugs to make my probation fees, to pay my rent, because I had a child and I was being docked with child support. I mean, the complexities of this world, right? At least the world that we experience as young people, it's a lot different now, right? It's totally different now, the way that mental health is than when we were out there. But those stressors of home insecurity, financial insecurity, all of those things, it's like, what happens to the mind? Well, the mind checks out. Like I'm dealing with trying to pay my rent. And instead of trying to pay my rent and telling myself that I'm unsuccessful financially, I become the Messiah. You feel me? Like I can't pay my rent. I can't make my probation fees, but it's easier for my mind to be in the place where I'm, the God of the universe. And what's really a trip about that is that in that place, right, there are so many things that happen to fortify that cosmic illusion, because it really is choose your illusion. Right? Am I going to choose that I'm, unsuccessful and unable to make my probation fees, unable to stay functionally at a job because I'm afraid all the time, literally living in PTSD? Or am I going to choose to be, the Messiah bringing mushrooms to the world and bringing LSD to the world? And what was more functional for me, what felt better for me, was that I was the Messiah. Now the world around me, right, was not able to accept Andrew as the Messiah.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's basically my experience as well. You know what I mean? But I think the thing that there's some levels of truth to that. You know what I mean? Like, and I think it's not one of the thinking that's, it is a similar, they call it like the messianic complex or whatever. It's a similar experience that people, have, as far as we're not alone in having that. But I think there's some elements of truth to that. You know what I mean? And that's
Oh,
kind
well,
of
fully. I mean, like, yeah.
going back to the the thing of, of Jesus and, and of having, and of that kind of united federation of chosen ones. I'm not saying everybody that believes that is necessarily true, but there's are some sort of some elements of that I believe are true, because mine was very similar, but very very, very detailed, you know what I mean? As far as signs and proof and all, you know what I mean? And all that kind of,
Bro, I'm right there with you, brother. I mean, as soon as
stuff,
I
you know what I
start
mean?
to, and this is the trip about this, okay, is that as a person that has experienced the density of that energy, because like for me, right, stepping into the macro, like let's just think about this as an energetic kind of experience, right? And there are years, thousands of years, basically, of people praying into the density of the Messiah, right? They have created images of the Messiah. They've created ideas of the Messiah. They've fortified it through prayer, through song, through dance. I mean, it's a thread through culture throughout the world that somewhere, somehow, some person would come to bring us into a place of living in alignment with the environment, living in alignment with one another. So there's an access point, right, of consciousness that I feel is able to like step into the density of that experience. So if you realize that that fortified energy is in a non-linear perception of reality, it's existing, right? And
Right.
then there's those of us that say like, okay, I'm going to play with that, unknowingly to what that means, right? What does it mean to step into the messiahship, like the
Right.
mothership, but it's the messiahship. And now we're traveling in another
But yeah,
existence.
right. But I don't think it's necessarily, at least for me, it sounds like it's not necessarily a conscious decision of I'm going to step into that. It's more of you're pulled into that. You know what I mean?
Well,
By
that's the thing is that it has a gravity,
spirit or whatever.
right?
It's like, yeah. There's a line in the Chili Peppers song, which is Red Hot Chili Peppers been a big, kind of part of my trip, so to speak. But he's like, a can't stop song, can't stop the spirits when they need you. This life is more than just a read through, so it's like, it's that spirit comes in and it's, there's, it's difficult to not play the role that you're intended to play, so to speak, but at the same time, like you're saying before, we're living in a fantasy world here, or a world in the current culture or whatnot, that it's not, you can't survive, you know what I mean? Like when it's like that Jesus, comes back, or the Messiah, whether it's Jesus or Messiah or whatnot, and that kind of like level of spirit, the first thing is you're going to get locked in prison, or he's getting locked in prison, or he's getting locked in a fucking mental ward,
Or get the shit
it's
kicked
not
out
like,
of you, or get shot, or
right, yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that goes back to your question of, of managing it, you know what I mean? And I guess trusting and recognizing, which for me was, surrendering to the mental health, world, and for whatever, reason may be, in order to kind of manage and exist and fulfill the ultimate, mission of being love and service and whatever that may, look like. I got to stay out of mental hospitals and jails, and so figuring out, after enough trips to mental hospitals and jails, the best way for me to do that is, take some medication and stay off of drugs and alcohol,
Right,
and
right.
find some sort of outlets to sort of channel things and kind of do the next right thing that God, spirit is putting in front of me, and having, the faith, which often, and the belief, which often wavers, that I do have a design, purpose, that there is a bigger forces at work in a bigger picture that is going to materialize and manifest, and I don't have to do much other than the next sort of right thing, and stay out of jails and mental hospitals, so, or do my best, do my sort of best to, and so yeah, that's
man, I love you, bro. Like, that's my common denominator as well. Like, literally, like, that's my default programming. Okay, if I'm not in jails or mental hospitals, I'm doing pretty fucking good. You know what I'm saying? Like, honestly, like, that's my default. And this is something that I'm gonna open up this conversation to, and because I've seen you in work, like, right, I've seen you manifest the foster kids, and these kids that are out there doing art, and they're singing, and they're showing themselves to the world, like literally gatherings of hundreds, if not thousands, of kids that are in the struggle of mental health. I've seen you in that place. I've been a part of that. I've been one of those people as a co-facilitator of that sacred space to see the functionality of Greg. And I'm like, okay, in that conversation, right, how do you not step back into the density of being the Messiah? Like, when you start to feel, and your magic is working. I'm talking about some shit right here that's real. I'm really talking about some
I'm
shit.
glad to go there. It's not,
bro, this is fucking huge.
Talk about, because obviously it's, talking about it too much gets you where I don't want to go, mental hospitals and jails.
Well, that's what I'm saying, bro. If you're not comfortable.
No, I'm comfortable talking about it.
No, but listen to me. I'm
going to share on my heart to want to talk about, but not having necessarily, someone to talk to about it, or in a safe kind of conversational sort of type of thing. So no, I'm good.
Okay,
man.
Cool. All right, cool. Because that's your mental health is more valuable than any conversation we could ever have about this stuff.
No.
So let me put that out there first of all. So in that space, right? Like, when you say this, it's the spirits that move you in that, and I know that Chili Peppers song because it was hitting me too, right? Because there are certain lines in songs, like I remember the Snoop Dogg song that was just like, you mentioned Snoop, and now I lay me down to sleep. That whole, man, it was like, it was right in the middle of my process, where every word was like, oh man, this is speaking right to me. It's speaking on a multiple different metaphorical level where I'm applying it to my life. And the Greeks actually call this the rhema word of God. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but this is like where there is a vibrational frequency in either somebody saying something to you or somebody, or a song that is personalized. And you're like, wow, this is the chills. This is, I'm feeling this in another dimension, basically. So as you say that, right, and you talk about the spirits, for me, right, it goes back to energy. Now, what happens is if we're holding a blanket, now check this out. This is a metaphor that I share with people that are in the experience that we've, fortunately, thank God, the universe, all the angels, the ancestors, everybody, that we didn't die in that shit, because there's a lot of us out there that have died in that, right? Give thanks that we're functioning and alive today, first of all, because it's so fucking intense that there are times when you want to put a bullet in your head or you want somebody else to put a bullet in you. And I'm just being flat out real. This is kids at home. We're talking about some real energetic shit that is extremely powerful and is not to be played with. Okay. So like this density of energy, it's a bowling ball. You imagine it as a bowling ball. This is how I look at it. We're both holding a blanket, right? And I'm talking about the Messiah energy, the, whatever you call it, the awakening, the psychosis, whatever you want to call it. Okay. I'm comfortable with whatever you put on it. So we both drop bowling balls. Me and Greg drop bowling balls. We're holding a blanket we drop marbles. I'm sorry. There's a bowling ball in the middle. We drop marbles. Where do those marbles go? They go to that density of energy, right? So like when you say the spirits move you, what I'm saying is that I can be in relationship to that density of energy, and I can look at it and I can talk to it and I can say, okay, that's great that you're doing that and you want me to do that, but I'm not going to be immersed in it because motherfuck you. You feel me? Like, I'm not going to go through that shit anymore. I'm not going to be out there preaching on the street, doing all that stuff, even though I can allow for myself to be in relationship to that density of energy. And I can say, hey, check it out. We can work together. Man, most people are not even going to understand this, what I'm talking about, okay?
Yeah.
Because this
Yeah.
is some really
But,
challenging stuff.
but yeah, but I think the piece of it too is, I mean, there is a level that you can control. There's a level that
Thank
you
you. Thank
can't
you. Thank you.
control
Thank you.
that
Thank you.
controls you. So even though you say you're not going to be preaching on the corner, and like, you know, we learn from our experiences that maybe that's not the best way to sort of reach people. But if the spirit moves you and you need to do something that's a little fucking out there, or they want you to do something that's a little out there to, you know, you're likely gonna, you know, be compelled to do it or whatever, you know. That's, I guess. And I guess that's, you know, that's a piece for me, is once, you know, once it gets to kind of a certain point,
you're unable to control it, right?
right. And some of
Now,
that.
how do you know that, though? That's the thing, is that, you know, how do you know when that's happening?
Well, I mean, I don't, so to speak, you know, it's kind of a progression, you know what I mean? A lot of it, I know, with me is like
Okay.
that, is like, for me, it's around, most of my episodes have been around, you know, initially it was around film projects. So like, you know, working on a film project, and like with the first one, which is around the, you know, the church. And so having a lot of those kind of come into the understandings of around, Jesus and the relationships with that. I was really into Martin Luther King, you know, and so I was praying a lot to like Martin Luther King and seeing a lot of like signs through that. I had an uncle who, and this is kind of a broader part of my experience or what. I was my mom's half brother, but he died of a heroin overdose when I was 3, and there was my mom's stepbrother, and his name was Graham Parsons, and he was a big musician at the time, kind of considered the innovator of all country rock, and was tight with the Stones, and did a lot of shit. And he overdosed in Joshua Tree, at this Joshua Tree, you know, sort of inn. And a lot of his music, or some of his music, had some kind of, you know, Jesus themes. Like he was into Jesus, but it was more on that Jesus, kind of the man, or more of that accessible, you know, Jesus that I was coming to kind of understand or whatever. So that was a part of kind of bringing me towards the Jesus thing that was all happening in this. And so it was sort of like in his music that was part of my, you know, trip, so to speak. So initially I became believing that I was like reincarnated through him, that I was, you know what I mean? That I was him. And then that kind of went to the, you know, kind of Messiah piece. And then it, you know, became more into this whole, you know, belief of understanding, or this story that I've unraveled, whether it's sort of true or not, but that, you know, that he had this, you know, kind of visions or something himself, and had like chosen me to be the, you know, when I was like 3 years old or 2 years old, basically kind of something came to me that I would be the, you know, the Messiah or whatever, you know what I mean? Kind of like the golden sort of child, and that he spread that through this kind of music, you know, community that he was a part of. And then that was this kind of, you know, path that I was sort of on, you know what I mean? And so it was like that's kind of part of it, with as far as, and then so that tied in, or the relationship of music, of why these bands were, you know, why these songs were singing about me, you know what I mean? Or this, it was kind of encouraging me on through that. So it's yeah, it was this kind of whole sort of deep thing. And I know that's not what your question was, which I forgot what your question was.
No, I get it. I get it. No, man, it's like, well, this is the thing, is that I feel like
story, and then it's tied where the whole Joshua Tree thing, then tying into U2, of, you know, this band who then from Ireland, who then names their first, you know, album Joshua Tree, which is out of the thing. And then definitely a lot of messages and shit, you know, in through U2 from early on till, you know, current stuff that definitely feeds in, and in my head backs up a lot of those kind of thoughts, so or ideas or whatever. So yeah, so that's kind of some of the little bit of the backstory.
It's amazing, man, like that you remember all that stuff, right? Like for me, like there's a part of me that wants to remember the sequences and the synchronicities that happened, but there's like a block. I know that while I was in those synchronicities, it made perfect sense. It like everything that was a part of it, all of the threads and there were family members that were involved in it. There were places that were involved in it. Like it was such an elaborate, intricate, like integrated story of like why I am this person. You know what I'm saying? Like that was what was so beautiful, that you're able to actually still articulate it. Like for me, right, it's a challenge to go back to that time and to know like every single part of it, the way that you are still able to maintain the knowledge base of whatever download was happening. Like I feel like there was something that was coming through for us that was like literally the wheel was spinning, on the computer. And like I had like interfaces with DNA, like I was seeing like DNA strands like hit me in the forehead, and like cosmic numbers were going through my mind and my consciousness. There was like this intersection of collective consciousness. Like I remember like seeing like people as stars, and like they were swirling in this whole like soup kind of thing, and in the middle of it was like this collective sun that everyone was gravitating towards. So like for me, like back to that marble, and the bowling ball, like that's what I seen like the density of our consciousness, like creating like a sphere of energy, and in that sphere of energy there's like a focal point, so like we're getting gravitationally pulled into that space, and it's like I'm living in relationship to it all the time. Maybe that's death, I don't know, maybe it's rebirth, I don't know, but I know that there are people that are way on the outside of it and people that are really close to it, and it feels like the people that are close to it are able to utilize that energy to bring about transformation in the world, to bring about people that are in foster care, like you've done, man. Like you brought foster care kids together, you brought kids together that are dealing with suicide, that are dealing with mental health, that are being like transforming the culture in a certain sense. And this stuff that we're talking about, when I share it, because Monica's had a similar experience as well, and when you talk about like going and being outside and being arrested naked, that was like some of the behaviors that have manifested in both of our lives, that I won't get into her particular story, but they're those kind of things are like very similar in the thread.